This video is brought to you by Mint Mobile. Switching to Mint Mobile is the easiest way to save in 2024. Wireless plans are $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. To get this new offer, go to mintmobile.com/Murrell. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan. This week we're going to be recapping the 4-day Martin Luther King Day Jr. weekend box office here in the US. That combined with my Emmys recap pushed this show to Wednesday from Tuesday. We'll also be taking your questions on the Mint Mobile hotline. There's lots of great stuff to get to, and let's dive right into the box office. We'll start with the 3-day box office from this past weekend. So this is January 12th through the 14th, which saw 2024's Mean Girls on top at $28.6 million. The new Mean Girls reportedly had a budget around $35 million, so it looks like it's headed toward a positive outcome unless the bottom totally drops out. And keep in mind, this is revenue that Paramount originally wouldn't have gotten because they had planned for Mean Girls to be a streaming release and pivoted last fall to have this be theatrical. It looks to be literally paying off for the studio. The new Mean Girls opened about $4 million ahead of the 2004 film, unless, of course, you were to adjust for inflation, in which case the new version would be significantly behind the older version. In second place was The Beekeeper with $16.5 million. Jason Statham and David Ayer teaming up for a movie that was reportedly modestly budgeted. If you haven't seen my review for that film, it drove me a little bit crazy. Wonka was in third place, dropping 39.8% with an $8.4 million total. In fourth place, actually moving up one spot from the previous weekend, is Anyone But You, which continues to hold extremely well, a 26.9% drop from the previous weekend and $7.1 million total. And rounding out the top 5 was Migration, which also held relatively well, a 37.7% drop and a $6.2 million total. Dropping out of the top 5 was Aquaman and the Last Kingdom with a 50% drop from the previous weekend and a $5.2 million total. Night Swim drops out of the top 5 as well. It dropped 60% from its opening weekend. Not very unusual for a horror movie, especially a January horror movie, at $4.6 million. The Boys in the Boat in its third weekend drops 38.5% for a $3.4 million total, followed by The Book of Clarence, not doing a whole lot in its debut, a $2.5 million total in ninth place. And then rounding out the top 10, we have The Iron Claw dropping 46.9% for a $2.4 million weekend total. Now, there is a little bit of a discrepancy in the top 10. There were some charts that listed the Indian film Guntur Karam in the top 10 with about $4.1 million, but those were contradicted by other reports that I usually find reliable that had it finishing outside the top 10. So I ended up not putting Guntur Karam in the top 10 for this weekend. If, in fact, that gross is accurate, the original gross, then I will reflect that in the movie's total gross in the weeks going ahead. As I've said so many times before, with Indian cinema, both domestically and internationally, it is very difficult to track because the reporting is often scattered and all over the place. Let's look quickly at the numbers for the 4-day Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. Mean Girls, of course, was still the number one film with $33.6 million, followed by The Beekeeper at $18.7 million, and Wonka in third place with just over $11 million. Kids Being Out of School actually helped to boost Migration to a narrow fourth place finish at $8.542 million versus Anyone But You's $8.5 million in fifth place. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom's in sixth at $6.3 million, followed by Night Swim at $5.4 million, The Boys in the Boat at $4.2 million. The Iron Claw actually flips with The Book of Clarence and beats it by about $3,000 to come in ninth place. And then we have The Book of Clarence in 10th place at just over $3 million. It was a nice debut for the new version of Mean Girls, but it was nowhere near the highest grossing films of all time on Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. American Sniper had the best performance of any film as it went wide back in 2015 and made over $107 million. Then we had Bad Boys for Life back in 2020. Boy, we didn't know what was on its way, which made $73 million. 2020 actually started off as a great year for movies, box office-wise. Avatar back in 2010 grossed $54.4 million, not an opening weekend, but a strong performance. Then we had Ride Along back in 2014 at $48.6 million. And 5 years ago, kind of hard to believe, was the opening of M. Night Shyamalan's Glass, which grossed $46.5 million over the 4-day weekend. Dropping out of the top 10 this past weekend were The Color Purple and Ferrari, two Christmas releases that spent just 2 weeks in the box office top 10, and then Poor Things, which was just in the top 10 for 1 week. This was actually its second stint in the top 10, and we'll see if they expand that theater count if Poor Things does well in the Oscar nominations next week. Looking at the movies that lost the most theaters this past weekend, The Color Purple lost about 2/3, 2,040 theaters gone. It remains in just 1,178 theaters. That is a big drop. Ferrari lost 1,459 theaters to fall out of wide release. It's now in just 662 theaters. That's an even bigger drop considering it opened right around the same time as The Color Purple. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom lost 812 theaters. It's now in 2,700 nationwide, followed by The Iron Claw, which dropped 800 theaters. It's now playing in 1,591. And then The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, drops out of wide release. It lost 695 theaters, about half of its remaining theater count. It's now in 733 theaters. Closing this week, and when I say closing, I mean there were no grosses reported compared to last weekend, is Saltburn, which is really making a lot of noise on streaming. Its theatrical run seemingly ended after 8 weeks. There were also no grosses reported for AMC's Taylor Swift The Eras Tour or Renaissance, the Beyonce movie, but I'm not going to declare either of them closed because I already said that the Eras Tour was closed when it wasn't closed. I'm not going to get burned twice by AMC, perhaps reporting its grosses late, so it's possible that both of those films are closed. We'll just have to check back and see once those final numbers are reported throughout the week. Looking at the road to recovery, we actually do have 2 weeks to literally connect the dots on, so we can see that with the box office total just over $100 million, we are both well ahead of where we have been in 2021 through 2023 and well behind where we've been in years past. The 2021 to 2023 era was led by the continued box office performance of Avatar: The Way of Water last year, whereas the highest grossing film for 2015 through 2019 was the continued performance of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, and that's one thing the box office is really missing right now. Of course, Wonka did well over that holiday season, and it still continues to perform well, but we don't have a Force Awakens. We don't have an Avatar. We don't have one of those movies that bridges the beginning of the year and the end of the previous year with these big box office grosses from weekend to weekend. A couple of other quick notes on some movies that were outside the box office top 10 this past weekend. Soul was released for the first time into domestic theaters by Disney. It didn't do particularly well, though. It was in 1,350 theaters. It grossed $431,000 for the weekend, which was about a $320 per theater average. That's lower than movies like Napoleon and Killers of the Flower Moon. Universal also expanded Oppenheimer once again into over 100 more theaters in the 70mm format, and business for the movie jumped about 25,000% from the previous weekend. It brought in around $375,000 in 139 theaters. It now stands about $45 million shy of $1 billion worldwide. Looking outside the domestic marketplace internationally, The Beekeeper was the #1 movie at $21.1 million, followed by Johnny Keep Walking, which continues to perform well in China at $19.4 million. Then Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom at $16.6 million, Wonka at $15.3 million, and Migration at $8.8 million. When you combine those international numbers with our domestic numbers, we get the top 5 films worldwide, and The Beekeeper is the #1 movie in the world at $37.7 million. Mean Girls, driven almost exclusively by its domestic opening weekend, is in second place at $35.1 million. Wonka is in third place at $23.7 million, a 44.7% drop from the previous weekend. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is in fourth place at $21.8 million, a 46.6% drop. And then Johnny Keep Walking drops 13% at $19.4 million. All of that money coming from China. And as we see Wonka in the top 10 worldwide for another weekend, looking at its gross right now, which is over $500 million now, it is less than $60 million away from eclipsing the worldwide gross of Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1 to become the 10th highest grossing 2023 release at the worldwide box office. And I don't know about you, but I certainly did not have in my predictions for 2023 Wonka either passing or getting close to passing Mission Impossible at the worldwide box office. That is a testament to both the strength of this Wonka movie and the weakness, unexpected weakness, of Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. So let's dive a little deeper into some of the movies in the domestic top 10, and we'll look first at Mean Girls and where it rates as far as live action musicals in the 21st century. A lot of them have really been clustered up in these last few weeks. As you can see, Wonka is the top opening live action musical since 2020 with its $39 million opening back in December. Then we have Mean Girls this past weekend at $28.6 million. The Color Purple is technically in third place with its opening weekend number at $11.7 million, although you have to keep in mind that The Color Purple opened on Christmas Day, which was a Monday, and if you were to take the first 3 days of The Color Purple, that first 3-day gross, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it would actually be in second place, right behind Wonka and ahead of Mean Girls, but that's just not how box office reporting works, and the records indicate the first opening weekend regardless of when the opening day was, but still worth mentioning. In fourth place is In the Heights back in summer of 2021, one of my biggest box office prediction misses. It opened to $11.5 million, and then 2022's Lyle Lyle Crocodile at $11.4 million is in fifth place. Steven Spielberg's West Side Story not even in the top 5. Jason Statham and David Ayer's Beekeeper was in second place, and I could show you a chart about Jason Statham openings, or I could show you a chart about David Ayer openings, but I decided to do something stupid instead. So let's look at the top 5 B movie openings. Now, what do I mean when I say B movies? I mean that it's a movie that has the word B or some variation of B in the title, at least as it applies to actual bees or something related to bees. So the top opening B movie is B Movie back in 2007, which opened to an unadjusted total of $38 million. In second place, we have 2018's Bumblebee, and though he's a transformer and not a bee, the naming convention and his color is obviously a reference to bees. $21.6 million opening back in December of 2018. Then we have The Beekeeper at $16.5 million, followed by 2008's The Secret Life of Bees at $10.5 million. And then in fifth place, we have Aquila and the Bee back in 2006, which opened to $6 million. Now, I am aware that that movie is neither about nor named after actual bees. It's about a spelling bee, but it does have the word bee in it, and quite frankly, I needed a fifth movie to round out this list. Of course, this is just a chart about movies with the word bee in the title. If you're going to do a chart about movies about bees, well, that opens up so many possibilities. I mean, does My Girl count as a movie about bees? They're certainly very crucial to the plot. It gets very muddy, so I decided to stick with just the named bee movies and not the more nebulous area of movies about bees. Wonka is in third place, and it continues to gain ground on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to become the highest grossing Roald Dahl adaptation domestically. Wonka is at $178.8 million, less than $30 million behind Tim Burton's version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And worldwide, Wonka has already claimed the title. It is officially the highest grossing film based on a Roald Dahl work at $509.6 million. That puts Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in second at $475.8 million. And looking at Wonka's profits, this is something that we've been tracking from week to week. These are my own estimates based on what I know of the box office business and how much comes back to the studios and investors. And of course, this does not include ancillaries or income other than global box office receipts. But when we look at the money that's been coming in as far as the net income after studios and different exhibitors take their cut, I estimated that Wonka cost around $225 million, $125 million budget, a $100 million advertising cost. The gross is now at over $500 million, and I can officially project, according to my own estimates, that Wonka's theatrical gross has now exceeded its cost, its net theatrical gross, and I believe that it is now turning a profit in the theatrical window based solely on movie ticket sales, which means that Wonka is going to be an incredibly profitable film for Warner Brothers, because as I've said on the show many times before, if a movie breaks even in the theatrical window, then all of that other stuff, digital sales, any kind of physical media sales, any sort of licensing of the film, even though that's a less lucrative market than it used to be, either to other streaming services after it runs on Max or to different television channels, any kind of merchandising or marketing or brand tie-ins, anything like that that happened with Wonka, that's all profit now on top of the theatrical gross because it was able to break even in the theatrical window. So Wonka, really an unquestionable success for Warner Brothers Discovery, and quite frankly, a movie that I wasn't sure was going to be one. Migration is still somewhat behind Hop to be the lowest grossing Illumination film domestically, but it is getting very close to Hop worldwide. It's now less than $20 million away from becoming not the lowest grossing Illumination release of all time. It will move into 13th place, and it will be very far behind The Lorax. It will stay in 13th place, but again, a bit of a moral victory for Migration worldwide, and we'll see how it continues to do domestically. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, speaking of moral victories, is now the highest grossing DCEU film of 2023 domestically. It has now passed The Flash. It's at $109.3 million in ninth place all time for the DCEU. The next film ahead of it domestically is 2019 Shazam at over $140 million. I'm not sure. We'll see if it's got enough gas in the tank to get there. And looking worldwide at the DCEU, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom has passed 2019 Shazam for 8th place all time. It's now at $377.7 million. Another, less than $20 million, and it will be able to pass Black Adam for 7th all time on the DCEU worldwide gross list. But that's where it's going to stop because it is not going to get close to Justice League's $655.9 million worldwide gross from back in 2017. And looking at my projection on Aquaman's profits, again, it hasn't become an absolute disaster for DC, but I still estimate that it is $145.7 million short of turning a profit in the theatrical window. This is a big movie. In case you didn't notice, there were brands like Guinness that I'm sure paid a lot of money to be featured very prominently in the film itself, but that's all money that's going to go to making up that shortfall at the global box office. And there's going to be a pretty significant shortfall with Aquaman. I think easily over $100 million. On a sliding scale, it is definitely not the worst that a movie did in 2023, but certainly far from the best as well. All right, before we wrap out the charts for the weekend, I want to take a few calls from our new Mint Mobile hotline. I have some great questions this week, and I've actually gotten some great questions so far, and a lot of calls, well over 100 calls at this point. Thank you to everybody that's called and left a question, and please continue to call. If you want to call the Mint Mobile hotline, that number is +1 323 863 3311. I've gotten so many great calls from people, and this is sort of a quick hit because I have 3 questions this week, all tied directly to the box office. And our first question is from James in Toronto, Canada.
Hey, Dan, what's up? This is James calling you from Toronto, Canada, actually. And my question is, when you do the box office numbers and you do the domestic numbers, is Canada included in those domestic numbers? Happy New Year, and thanks for the show every week. Take care.
Thanks for the question, James. There have been a few people that have asked this, but it's good to kind of officially get the answer out there. Yes, when I talk about domestic box office, that includes the U.S. and Canada. I used to say North American box office, and then I realized that that's not accurate because Mexico and a whole lot of other countries are not included in that box office picture. So I say domestic box office, but it's not just U.S., it's also our friendly friends to the north of us up in Canada. Why is it that way? I have no idea. That's just the way that the system is set up. Our next question is from Scott, just outside Chicago, Illinois, and it's actually a question that I like quite a bit.
Hi, Dan. This is Scott. I live in the suburbs of Chicago, so I get a nice variety of theatrical releases here. I try not to let a movie's box office performance or lack thereof affect my opinion of the movie's quality, how well it's written, directed, acted, and so on. I try not to, but sometimes it does. I'm just curious, because you spend so much time analyzing box office performance, whether you're aware of it affecting your judgments of the movie's quality. Thanks very much for taking questions.
Thanks for that question, Scott. And that's something that I get asked a lot as far as money and quality and the discussion between them. And it's something that I've been very clear when I talk about the channel. This show is about box office and tracking the financial well-being of a movie. but I've tried to be very clear, and I'm very passionate about the fact that the box office gross does not in any way tie to the quality of a film, at least in the sense that a film can fail at the box office if it's not very good or not very well received. But I don't necessarily think that a film's not very good if it fails at the box office. That's not an equal setting there. I love to talk about the finance of movies on this show because I find it fascinating. And as I said, it's almost like a sociological study. But the rest of the channel largely is dedicated to talking about the films artistically. And I can say that I can't think of a case where my opinion of a movie has been swayed either way, honestly, by how it actually does perform at the box office. I love The Creator as much as I did when I saw it after I saw how much it made at the box office, which is not much. And, movies like The Greatest Showman that I did not give a good review to, and then it came out and did so well at the box office, people have said like, oh, well, see, are you rethinking your thoughts because obviously you were wrong? No, because my feeling on The Greatest Showman has nothing to do with the fact that a bunch of people went to see it and a bunch of people enjoyed it. That's great, but that doesn't sway my opinion because it is completely disconnected to how it does at the box office and how it's received by others. So for me, it's two different worlds. There's box office in the world that we talk about here on Charts, and then there is my actual feeling on a film, which has to do with how it makes me feel and how well it's crafted. And those are, to me, completely separate discussions, and I think that they should be separate discussions for everybody. Our final question comes from Christian in Akron, Ohio, and it's something that I've actually had to correct myself on in years past.
Hi, Dan. My name's Christian. I'm from Akron, Ohio. My question for the hotline has to do with how screens are counted at theaters. Do they count each theater that a movie is showing at? Do they count each screen at the theater that a movie is showing at? Do they count the number of screen times? I'm just very curious about it and would love to have you answer it. Thanks so much for all you do. I love how it encourages my nerdiness and gives me data to talk about with friends who care to listen. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for that question, Christian. And this is something that I've actually changed myself as far as how I refer to the per theater average, because I used to call it the per screen average, and a lot of people used to call it the per screen average, but that is actually misleading. Because when I say the per theater average, that is based on the actual physical location that a movie is in. If a movie theater is playing Avengers Endgame on 10 different screens, that location still counts as one theater. So if Avengers Endgame is in 4,000 theaters, it could be on 10,000 or 12,000 screens around the country, but that's not what we want to know. We don't want to know how many individual screening rooms or how well the movie's doing in each individual screening room. We want to know how well the movies are doing in each individual theater building, whether that's a multiplex or a single screen theater. I know that it is a bit complex to break it down, but it's something that I think is a misconception. And so this is a very long-winded answer to your question. The per theater average refers to the number of actual buildings that a movie is playing in, not the number of actual screens that the movie is playing on. Thanks to everybody that left a message on the Mint Mobile hotline, and please call and leave your question. I might answer it here on the show. And before we move on, I want to thank the people responsible for the Mint Mobile hotline, Mint Mobile. We're over halfway through January, and how are those New Year's resolutions looking? I know they can be a real pain, but you know what's never a hassle? Saving money. And for a limited time, all wireless plans from Mint Mobile are $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. That's unlimited talk, text, and data for $15 a month. Think about what you're paying for mobile service right now. If you're not with Mint, I can just about guarantee you it's more than $15. Now think of what you could do with all that money that you'd be saving. Maybe enough to buy those new running shoes, because that's definitely the thing holding you back from working out every day, right? You can say goodbye to that unpleasant surprise when you see just how much your service provider is really charging you, because at Mint, all plans come with unlimited talk and text, plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. And you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring over your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/Murrell. That's mintmobile.com/Murrell. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Murrell. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. All right, let's wrap out this past weekend by looking at some of the other weekend charts, and we'll look at the top per theater averages. We were just talking about this. At number one is The Zone of Interest, which brought in $9,519 per theater in 25 theaters, so a bit of an expansion for The Zone of Interest. Common Ground, which is a documentary that came out several weeks ago, played in one theater, probably a special engagement, bringing in $8,221 in that theater. Mean Girls and its debut was good enough for third place on the per theater chart at $7,553 in each of its 3,791 theaters. Playing in just one theater is a 4K restoration of the film Household Saints from director Nancy Savoca, starring Vincent D'Onofrio, Lily Taylor, and Tracy Ullman. $6,153 in that one theater. And then in fifth place, bringing in $6,127 in one theater, is the Jordanian film Inshallah a Boy, which is that country's submission this year to the Academy Awards. It's a movie about a woman pretending to be pregnant in order to get around strict laws regarding her rights after her husband dies. Looking at the top films in limited release, this is in 1,000 theaters or fewer. This is that disputed number that I talked about. At number one is Hanuman in 430 theaters, bringing in $2.3 million. This is the first in a Telugu language superhero cinematic universe in India. In second place, I have Guntur Karam, which also has a reported gross of $2.3 million. That could be $4.1 million. Again, I have conflicting sources there, but I do have it playing in 800 theaters. American Fiction had a big expansion. It's now up to 625 theaters. It brought in $1.9 million. Poor Things had a decrease in theater count. It's now in 580 theaters, but still healthy in the limited release box office world. $1.78 million for Poor Things. And then All of Us Strangers in 120 theaters brings in $464,300. Looking at the top 10 grossers in limited release this calendar year, so this is all ticket sales beginning on January 1st. Poor Things is at number one with $7.46 million, followed by American Fiction at just under $4 million. Hanuman and Guntur Karam right now are tied for third and fourth place. All of Us Strangers is in fifth place, moving down 3 spots at $1.2 million. Then we have The Zone of Interest in sixth place at just under $500,000. Solar Part 1 Ceasefire is in seventh place. Donkey is in eighth place. Memory moves up 1 spot to ninth place, and Fallen Leaves moves down 1 spot to 10th. Origin and Noryong Deadly Sea move out of the top 10 limited release chart for this year. Looking at the top fall holiday box office releases for 2023, so these are movies released post-Labor Day last year. We still have movement on this chart. Wonka is very close to passing Taylor Swift The Eras Tour on this chart, which means it would also become one of the 10 highest-grossing films domestically released in 2023. It's about $2 million behind The Eras Tour, so we should see a changing of the guard next week. The Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes remains in third place, followed by Five Nights at Freddy's. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom moves up into that fifth spot, followed by Trolls Band Together, which drops down to number 6. Migration moves up 2 spots to number 7, with The Nun 2 dropping down to 8th place, The Marvels dropping down to 9th place, How the Mighty Have Fallen, and Killers of the Flower Moon staying in 10th place. Looking at the 2024 annual domestic box office, so these are films released in 2024. Mean Girls is at number 1 at $33.6 million. Night Swim moves down 1 spot to $20 million. The Beekeeper comes in third place at $18.7 million, followed by The Book of Clarence in fourth place, and then Hanuman and Guntur Karam in fifth and sixth place. These are movies with a gross of over $1 million. And then looking at all tickets sold since January 1st, this is the calendar year box office. Wonka's at number 1 with $45.7 million of sales since the first of the year, followed by Migration now in second place at $34 million. Then we have Mean Girls entering in third place at $33.6 million. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom moves down 2 spots to number 4 at $32.8 million. Anyone But You moves down to fifth place, but it should pass Aquaman very soon, you would think, for tickets sold since January 1st. Night Swim is down 1 spot to number 6. The Beekeeper enters the chart at number 7. And then The Boys in the Boat, The Color Purple, and The Iron Claw all dropped 2 spots from last week. Ferrari and The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes drop off the calendar gross chart for 2024. And finally, looking at the 2024 worldwide box office, this is always tough to judge at the beginning of the year, so these are the numbers that I have. Mean Girls is now the highest grossing film of the year at $40.1 million, followed by The Beekeeper at $39.8 million, and Night Swim at $30.5 million. And before we wrap up, I want to take a look at a weekend in box office history, and we're going to go back to MLK Jr. Day weekend in the year 2001, which saw the debut of Save the Last Dance, starring Julia Stiles, about a ballerina who learns hip-hop dancing and creates her own special form of dance, and in the process solves racism. It's really quite a heartwarming story. $27.5 million back in 2001, I guess is appropriate for the weekend, and a final domestic total back then of $91 million. Castaway was in second place at $19.7 million, followed by Traffic, which was a very long-legged movie at the box office, $13.4 million for a running total at that time of $35.3 million, although its final domestic total was just under $125 million. Then we had Double Take, starring Orlando Jones and Eddie Griffin. What an early 2000s pairing there. $11.7 million. Its final was just around $29.8 million. And then in fifth place, the Mel Gibson-Helen Hunt film. That's another early 2000s pairing. What Women Want at $11.6 million for a running domestic total at that point of $153 million. Of course, we don't always leave movies where they are. I didn't adjust for inflation last week because we didn't go that far back and it was a somewhat marginal difference. But this is over 20 years ago, so we are going to hit that inflation button and see what these grosses look like in today's dollars. And when we look at it this way, Save the Last Dance opened to an adjusted total of $47.3 million over the 4-day weekend for a final domestic total of $156.7 million. Then we had Castaway at $34 million on its way to a final domestic total of over $400 million adjusted for inflation. Traffic at $23.1 million for a $60 million total to that point and a $213 million adjusted total. Double Take opening to just over $20 million on its way to a $50 million total, and What Women Want also at just over $20 million and ending at a $314.7 million adjusted total. And again, when you look at these numbers, both weekend and the total box office, you can see the decline as far as people going to the movies based off of, 20 plus years ago. It doesn't seem that long ago to me, but it was over 2 decades ago. And that wraps us up for this week on Charts with Dan. January is a pretty deadly slow month. The only major release coming out this weekend is the space thriller ISS, which I'll probably see just because, I want to review something here this week. So if you're in the market for a space thriller starring Ariana DeBose, this is your weekend, and it's a very specific desire, but hey, congratulations. If not, come back next week and we'll talk about ISS and the other films at the box office as we start to navigate what seems to be a very tricky 2024. Also, stay tuned right here on the channel. I'll be doing the news show later this week, probably reviewing ISS as well. And then we are building up to a big week next week, which is the revelation of the Oscar nominations as we get into that part of the year. So a lot of stuff going on, even if it's a slow week and a few weeks at the box office, there's a lot of stuff going on elsewhere in Hollywood, and I'll cover it all right here. Thank you so much for spending part of your day here with me. Thanks to Mint Mobile, and thanks to everybody that called in to the Mint Mobile hotline. And if you're out there in the cold weather and everything, please stay warm and stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.